Imagine that you, a high school student, are sitting in English class. You are chatting with your friends when suddenly you hear gunshots outside of your classroom. Everything stands still for a moment, and then people are running and screaming, and you are being led to hide in a cupboard. You are now in the dark, breathing heavily, and trying not to make any sound because you know that your life is in danger. You then hear the shooter's footsteps approach the cupboard and the click of their finger on the trigger, ready to shoot anyone that they see. A flash of light as they open the cupboard door, and bang! Your friend next to you falls down on the ground. You cry out, grabbing at your dead friend's cold, lifeless flesh in desperation before the police comes to take you away. Does this situation sound like something you've seen in the media or the news? Now imagine turning on the news, with your dead friend and the gunshots fresh in your mind, and realizing that your tragedy only deserved to be on the news for 3 days before the media moved on. Realizing that people paid attention to your innocent friend's death for a fleeting amount of time before they forgot about them. Realizing that there is no societal empathy to fill the empty void that is left in your community. This scenario is a case for many mass shooting victims in today's society. After a few days, they go unnoticed, unappreciated, ignored. As human beings, we consider ourselves as compassionate creatures. But what happens when we become desensitized to violence and reach our empathy limit? Hi, my name is Emmy Thamakaison, and I am here to talk to you today about the detrimental effects of desensitization to violent crime and our resulting compassion fatigue. So first, what is desensitization? Well, to be desensitized is to not experience an emotional response to something after repeated exposure to it. Sometimes this can be useful. For instance, without desensitization, medical students would be unable to study cadavers, and firemen would be unable to save people with charred body parts and melting faces. However, there is a dark side to this process, as there are two sides to every coin. Societal desensitization can result in the normalization of crises and issues. For instance, gun violence, along with baseball and apple pie, is all but a staple in the American society. When the Columbine High School shooting occurred in 1999, the statistic of the 13 murdered children sent waves of shock and sadness throughout the United States. Now, nearly 21 years later, this shooting is no longer a unique evil, as gun violence and school shootings now gets reported on a regular basis. In 2019 alone, there have been over 34,000 mass shooting casualties and 366 mass shootings in the United States. That's more mass shootings than there are days in the year. With this colossal amount of tragedies, each incident receives a negligent amount of news coverage. We reach out, and then the news drags our attention to something else. We move on, and this goes on and leads to normalization. According to a study done by the University of Wisconsin, repeated exposure to gun violence in the media results in the US public's emotional desensitization to this crisis. Using computerized linguistic analysis, the researchers reported a notable decrease in the amount of disgust, anger, and sadness that the public felt towards similar consecutive school shootings. This shows how the repetition of gun violence, along with negligent media coverage, results in the normalization of the murder of school children. And it's not only gun violence. According to CNN, there has been a rise in desensitization to all violent crime in our modern society, and this is partly due to the technological advancement that we have experienced over the past few decades. Now we have 24-hour news that exposes us to assault upon assault, murder upon murder, mass shooting upon mass shooting. It's like the card game Uno. As a player stacks the cards onto the pile, we can't linger too long on one card before turning our attention to another. Similarly, with the small amount of media coverage for each incident, we can't fully empathize with one incident before turning our attention to another. And so, what your brain does to prevent you from stretching your emotional attention too thin is to desensitize yourself. You will start to experience compassion fatigue and grow indifferent to the suffering of others. According to Professor Bruce Harry of the University of Missouri School of Medicine, we become psychologically numb when exposed to a plethora of trauma and violence. It's a defense mechanism that all of us have. Our brains will try to create cognitive and emotional distance in order to keep us mentally healthy. Because, as one may say, ignorance is bliss. However, a resulting lack of concern has detrimental effects towards the bigger picture. Desensitization does not help alleviate the crimes around us, nor does it make us truly more safe. Rather, our lack of interest stands as an obstacle that hinders resolution. There is a lack of response that results in unsolved crises. A vicious cycle of death and despair and pain is being perpetuated by our apathy as crime and more crime is happening every day, and nobody is emotionally invested enough to care about it because we've all seen it before. And this has to stop. We have to stop. It's time that we recalibrate as a society and push past our instincts to ignore traumatic events. But how can we practice emotional endurance in the face of countless of headlines and crimes? Well, you can first acknowledge the humanity involved in these events. The critical state victims in the hospitals, those who suffer from PTSD, the mothers who are weeping over their dead children. When we see these incidents in the media, we must see them as more than headlines, and rather human stories that are filled with human emotion and human suffering. We must personalize these tragedies and realize that we could have been in their shoes. But why is this important? Well, according to Professor Daniel Batson of the University of Kansas, empathy results in altruistic motivation and a desire to end the suffering of others, which is a catalyst for change. And this leads us on to our next point, that we must act upon this empathy and help these victims in every way that we can. You can vote, you can sign a petition, you can talk about it on social media, but whatever you do, please do your part in supporting these victims and making sure that history does not repeat itself again. If enough people come together to promote a change, I assure you that we can make a difference. Take the March for Our Lives movement, for example. In that movement, over 1 million young protesters came together to rally for stricter gun laws. This resulted in 26 states enacting 67 new gun laws, which is almost triple the amount of gun laws enacted in 2017. I want to make this clear. Your voice matters. As we see more and more violence in the media every day, I want you all to come back to the school shooting scenario in which your tragedies go unnoticed, unappreciated, simply because they were unoriginal. We cannot live in a world where the repetition of crises results in boredom and apathy. So let's stop accepting crime and violence as a cost of living in this world and start practicing our compassion towards one another. Thank you.